My name is Beth Donnelly, and I am 29 years old. On the afternoon of my wedding, I found my father standing in a side corridor of a country club ballroom, looking for the seat that had been promised to him by name and watching 9 people he had never met before sit down at the table that was supposed to be his. Table 1, center of the room, 6 feet from the dance floor. That was where my parents were supposed to be. Instead, when the doors finally opened and the guests began to file in, my mother and father were directed to table 18, the very last table in the room, pressed into the corner between the service entrance and a stand of unused linens still wrapped in plastic. And when I cornered the man I had been planning to marry and asked him how this had happened, I heard him say something about my father that I could not unhear. I stood in that corridor in my wedding dress with 180 guests waiting on the other side of a wooden door, and I made a decision that I cannot take back and would not take back, and have never spent a single quiet evening since regretting. What I did, what he said, and what happened to his family in the months that followed, that is the story I am about to tell you. Before I begin, tap that like button if this kind of story is the reason you came here tonight, and subscribe if you are new to this channel. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below because I find it grounds the conversation to know where you are sitting while you listen. Now let me take you back to the morning of October 5th, the very last morning I ever woke up engaged, to a town called Westmont, in the western corner of Pennsylvania, where the gas station off Route 30 still puts up a sign every fall that says, "Good luck to the high school football team," to a house at the end of Larkspur Street, where my parents have lived for 31 years. Westmont, Pennsylvania. Population just over 6,000. The kind of town where the man at the hardware store calls you by your father's name before he calls you by your own. I was raised at 412 Larkspur, a 1.5-story house with white aluminum siding that my father, Frank Donnelly, paid off the year I turned 18. He'd worked 38 years as a residential and small commercial electrician, starting as an apprentice at 16 with a man named Walter Pelletier, who he still drives to the diner for coffee on Saturday mornings. My father's hands tell you everything about my father. The first 2 knuckles on his right hand are slightly thickened from a wire he caught wrong in 1994. There is a small white scar across the back of his left thumb from the time he came home from a job a little too tired and slipped with a utility knife. He worked through both injuries. He worked through a torn rotator cuff in 2008 because we needed the money that month for my orthodontia. He has never once, in 38 years, called in sick on a day I had a school event. My mother, Mary Donnelly, has worked at the Westmont Public Library for 22 years as a part-time circulation assistant, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. She knows every regular by their library card number. She slips bookmarks shaped like little dogs into the books of the elderly woman with macular degeneration who can never remember which page she stopped at. She keeps a small box of generic reading glasses behind the desk for the kids in the after-school program who come in to do their homework and forgot theirs at school. She also held a second job for most of my childhood, cleaning offices at the small medical building on Bridge Street 3 evenings a week, although she rarely talked about it because my father did not love that she worked nights and because she did not want me to grow up thinking of her as tired. She was tired. She just did not want me to think of her that way. We were not poor, exactly. We were the kind of family that did not buy anything we could not pay for that month, that ate dinner together at 6:30 every evening at the same formica-top table that has been in our kitchen since before I was born, and that put a little aside each month into a credit union account that my father called, with a slightly self-conscious chuckle, the someday account. The someday account paid for my braces. It paid for the used Toyota Corolla I drove in high school. It paid the deposit on my dental hygiene program. And, in the end, it paid for the most expensive single-line item at the wedding I never had. I worked my way through dental hygiene school at the community college in Pittsburgh and licensed out at 21. By 25, I had paid off every last cent of my school loans, working at a family dental practice in Westmont owned by a woman named Dr. Yvonne Pack, who hired me the week I graduated and who is, to this day, one of the 3 or 4 people whose opinion of me I take seriously. By 28, I owned a 5-year-old Honda Civic. I had $8,000 in an emergency fund, and I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment above a flower shop on Main Street, where the floors slanted toward the kitchen and the heat clanked all winter. I had built that life with my own 2 hands, and 40 extra hours of work on the side every month at a second dental practice in Greensburg. The foundation under it, though, was Frank and Mary Donnelly. I had always assumed a family like that was, in itself, an asset. That to be raised by people like Frank and Mary was an inheritance richer than money. I would learn, slowly and then very suddenly, that there are people in this world who would look at my parents and see not an inheritance, but a problem to be managed. I met Tucker Ashford Bellamy on a Thursday in late February of the year I turned 27. His grandmother, Margaret Ashford Bellamy, came into the practice for a routine cleaning. She was 83 years old and as sharp as a freshly stropped razor. Tucker brought her because she'd given up driving the previous winter. He sat in the waiting room with a leather portfolio open on his lap, working on his laptop. When I walked through the lobby to escort his grandmother back to the chair, he looked up and smiled at me. I will not pretend I did not smile back. He was 31, taller than I was used to, with the kind of clean-shaven jaw and tortoiseshell glasses you see in the photo spreads on the websites of regional law firms. He worked, I would learn, in commercial banking at his family's bank, a 3-generation institution headquartered in Pittsburgh with branches in 14 towns across western Pennsylvania, including a small office on Bridge Street in Westmont. He asked me out for coffee that Saturday. By the end of March, we were having dinner twice a week. By June, he was driving the 45 minutes from his apartment in Shadyside to my apartment above the flower shop every Friday evening with a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine. He was, in those early months, the most attentive man I had ever dated. He listened. He remembered. He sent me articles about whatever I had mentioned offhand the week before. He drove out to Larkspur Street on a Saturday in July to meet my parents and ate 2 helpings of my mother's pot roast and shook my father's hand for what felt like a long time on the front porch when he left. I drove home from Westmont that evening, replaying that handshake. My father had looked Tucker in the eye the entire time. I had taken that, at the time, as a sign. The Ashford Bellamys lived in a different country. Their home in Sewickley Heights was a brick colonial built in 1923, set back from the road by a long driveway lined with oaks that someone had planted on purpose 80 years ago. Edmund Ashford Bellamy, Tucker's father, ran the bank. His mother, Camilla, was the executive director, in title only by then, of a regional nonprofit called the Children's Welfare Society of Westmoreland County, an organization she had chaired the board of for 16 years before being elevated, in her own words, to a more contemplative role. She wore camel-colored cashmere on Sundays and pearls every other day of the week. The first time Tucker took me to dinner at their home, in early October of our first year together, Camilla met me at the front door, took both of my hands in hers as if she were inspecting a piece of fabric, smiled with the lower half of her face only, and said, "A dental hygienist. How dependable." Then she looked over my shoulder at Tucker and said, Darling, I assumed you were bringing Annette. Annette, as I would learn later that evening from Tucker in a slightly embarrassed aside, was a woman his mother had been encouraging him to call for over a year. She was the daughter of an orthopedic surgeon at the largest medical center in the region. Camilla, Tucker said, was just being awkward. She was not being awkward. Camilla Ashford Bellamy was never, in the entire 2 years I knew her, awkward. Camilla was, at all times, calibrated. She measured every interaction the way a chemist measures a reagent, exactly, with the smallest visible margin of error. What I read in those first months as the stiffness of a woman not used to making small talk was, I would come to understand, a series of small rehearsals. She was practicing the rooms she planned to put me in. I told myself the things you tell yourself. I told myself she was old-fashioned. I told myself she was protective of her only son. I told myself, more than anything, that the way she spoke to me in the powder room of the country club on the night of the engagement party did not actually mean what it sounded like it meant. I told myself a lot of things. Tucker, when I tried to bring it up, in his apartment in Shadyside one Sunday morning over coffee, reached across the kitchen island and took my hand and said, "Beth, I love you. My mother is who my mother is. After the wedding, we are going to have our own life." Her opinion of where to seat people at brunch will, I promise you, not appear once in our actual marriage. I believed him. Or, more precisely, I wanted to believe him so much that I was willing, for almost 2 years, to behave as if I did. He proposed 14 months after our first coffee, on a Saturday in April, at a steakhouse in downtown Pittsburgh that, I would only learn afterward, was partially owned by his uncle. There was a private dining room with a single table set for 2, a string trio in the corner, and a small box from a jeweler in New York on a velvet tray. The waiter, who introduced himself by name and who clearly had been briefed, brought out a bottle of champagne that I would later look up online and find listed at $1,100. Tucker got down on one knee. I said yes, because I had spent 14 months convincing myself that the man kneeling in front of me was the man who had driven through a snowstorm in February to bring me cold medicine and an electric blanket when I had the flu. I said yes because I was 28 years old and I had loved this man, or what I had taken for him, every Friday evening for 61 straight weeks. The wedding planning began the following Monday. I do not know, looking back, when exactly it stopped being our wedding and started being Camilla's. Probably the second Tuesday. By the third Tuesday, Camilla had set up a recurring weekly call with a wedding planner named Yvette Trabucco, a woman who had been planning Sewickley Society weddings for over 20 years and who had, by her own admission on our first joint phone call, never planned a wedding at a venue she had not personally vetted. The venue was the Ashford Bellamy Family Country Club. An obvious choice, Camilla said, given that Edmund and his father had both been chairmen of the membership committee in their respective decades. My mother and I had spent a Saturday in February driving around the western edge of Westmoreland County, looking at small chapels and a converted Victorian inn that had a porch with a hand-carved railing. I do not know why we did this. It had been clear, from the moment of the proposal, that we were not going to be married at any of them. I think my mother and I just wanted, for one Saturday, to pretend. Camilla picked the florist. Camilla picked the caterer. Camilla picked the calligrapher. Camilla picked the cake designer, a woman in Highland Park who had baked the cake for the daughter of the lieutenant governor in 2017, and who, Camilla noted on the email thread, only accepted commissions through referral. When my mother, who had baked every birthday cake of my childhood, and who is, on the subject of buttercream, an authority who has earned her opinions over 40 years of practice, gently suggested that she would love to contribute the groom's cake. Camilla replied, on the email thread, with a single sentence. "How sweet of you, Mary, but the family thinks it would be cleanest if we keep the dessert program in one hand." My mother, when she read the email aloud to me at her kitchen table that evening, paused on the word program and looked at me. And I watched something in her eyes go briefly and very quietly, very tired. Then she folded the email back into thirds and said, "Well, she's the bride's mother-in-law. We pick our battles." We picked our battles. That was the phrase that defined the 7 months of wedding planning. We pick our battles. Tucker said it. I said it. My parents said it. My maid of honor, Joe Reyes, who I had known since we shared a dorm room our freshman year of community college, did not say it. Joe, who had grown into a family law attorney with a small practice in Pittsburgh, said other things. She said them once. She said them in March, sitting on the floor of my apartment with a glass of wine, 6 months before the wedding. And what she said was, "Beth, listen to me. The way that woman talks about your parents on Facebook, the way she introduced you to her bridge group as Tucker's girl, the fact that your name is not on the engagement announcement she put in the Post-Gazette. These are not nothing. These are signals. Read them." I did not read them. I told Joe, who I love like a sister, that she did not understand small-town family politics. Joe, whose mother is from a small town in Puerto Rico and who could have written a doctoral thesis on small-town family politics, took a long sip of wine and said only, "Okay, I love you. Just keep your eyes open. And do not, under any circumstances, sign anything without showing me first." By August, 2 months before the wedding, the budget had ballooned to $92,000. The Ashford Bellamys covered most of it, which Camilla mentioned in passing in 3 out of every 4 conversations. My parents, who had set aside a little every month for over a decade into the Someday account, contributed $11,500. That money, by the agreement we had all signed off on in May, was earmarked for the bar package, including champagne for the toasts and the live band that would play during dinner and dancing. It was the single largest check my parents had ever written in their entire lives. My father walked into the credit union on Bridge Street on a Tuesday afternoon and handed the manager, a man who had known him for 30 years, the deposit slip. The manager looked at the number, looked at my father, and said, "Frank, that's a hell of a daughter you must have." My father, who tells me this story now with a small, embarrassed smile, said, "Donald, you have no idea." He came home that night and he cried, briefly, at the kitchen table. He has only ever cried in front of me 3 times in my entire life. That was the second. The morning of October 5th broke gray and crisp over Westmoreland County. I woke up at 6:15 in my old bedroom on Larkspur, in the bed I had slept in from age 4 to 18, with my mother's hand-pieced log cabin quilt folded across the foot of it. The dress was hanging on the closet door. It was ivory silk crepe with a draped V-neck and a sweep train, and I had paid for it myself. $1,400 at a small bridal shop in Pittsburgh, after declining, with what I thought was admirable patience, 3 separate offers from Camilla to take me to her seamstress in New York for a custom gown. The dress was the one part of the wedding I had insisted, repeatedly and over Camilla's audible disappointment, on owning entirely. By 10, I was at the country club. Yvette and her assistants had been there since 6. The main ballroom looked like a magazine. White roses and pale green hydrangeas in tall mercury glass vases. Ivory linens with a slight texture. Gold-rimmed chargers at each place setting. A small handwritten name card in black ink at every seat. A live band setting up on a raised dais. A string trio that would play during cocktails in the ceremony. $92,000 of beautiful. 180 guests expected, roughly half from each side, on paper. In practice, the Ashford-Bellamy half was, as my father put it later with what passes in him for dryness, a different demographic. State senator's brother, 2 bank board members, the bishop's nephew, a regional vice president of a steel company, the Callaways, the Stovalls, the Maringers. The other half, my half, was Frank and Mary Donnelly's people, 2 of my mother's co-workers from the library, 3 of my father's apprentices from over the years, all of them now master electricians with their own crews. Dr. Pack and her husband, Jo and her brother, Aunt Trudy, who had driven down from Erie, a cluster of cousins, the neighbor who has lived 3 houses down from us on Larkspur since I was 6, people who drove pickups, who wore the nicest dresses they owned, who had never in their lives held a charger plate and would not have known to leave it in front of them when the first course came out. I noticed the imbalance in seating early, during the rehearsal walkthrough on Friday night. The Ashford-Bellamy guests had been placed at the front of the room, at tables 2, 3, 4, and 5, in the wide arc closest to the head table. The Donnelly guests were arranged toward the back, tables 10 through 17, drifting in a slow gradient toward the rear of the room. I had mentioned it, in passing, to Yvette on Friday. Yvette had assured me, with the smooth, practiced calm of a woman who had been smoothing over exactly this kind of question for 2 decades, that the arrangement was based on relationships to the families and ease of conversation, that this was standard, and that everyone, including my parents and Aunt Trudy, was confirmed at Table 1 as my approved seating chart had specified. I had taken her at her word. I had checked the chart. The chart still said what it had said when I signed off on it in August. Table 1, front and center. Frank and Mary Donnelly, Aunt Trudy, Tucker's grandmother Margaret, Edmund and Camilla, Tucker's Uncle Bradford and his wife Lindsay. 10 place settings at one round table where both halves of the family would sit eye to eye for the entirety of the dinner. The ceremony was scheduled for 12:30. By 12:20, I had been zipped into the dress, the photographer had taken the bride and her mother set in the morning room overlooking the 18th hole, and I had hugged my father in the hallway outside the bridal suite. He had been wearing the dark gray suit he had bought 10 years ago from a men's warehouse in Greensburg for the funeral of his oldest brother, the only good suit he owned, freshly dry-cleaned the previous week. He had stood in front of me in that hallway, holding my hands at the wrist, and said, "Beth, whatever happens today, your mom and I are right here. You hear me?" I have, over the years since, replayed that sentence many times. He had not, in the moment, meant it as foreshadowing. I do not believe he had any sense, at 12:20 on Saturday afternoon, of what the next 4 hours would bring. But there are some sentences a father says to his daughter that do not actually require the future to make them true. He had meant only that he loved me. He had meant only that, regardless of how nervous I was, I had a place to stand. He could not have known, looking into my eyes in that hallway, that within an hour, the place to stand was going to become the entire question. The ceremony itself went exactly as ceremonies do. The string trio, the walk down the aisle on my father's arm, Tucker waiting at the front in a dark navy suit, and the slightly stunned, slightly proud expression of a groom. The officiant, a friend of Edmund's, reading the lines we had selected. The rings. The kiss. The applause. We walked back down the aisle to the side of the building where the cocktail hour was set up on a wide veranda. Tucker and I were ushered, briefly, into the bridal suite for one of those interludes that exist on every wedding day, when the bride and groom are kept slightly out of view while the guests work through the first round of cocktails. I needed a moment alone. I told Tucker I wanted to check the ballroom one more time before the reception. He laughed and kissed me on the temple and said, "Beth, Yvette has handled it. It is going to be perfect." I said, "I know. Habit. 5 minutes." He let me go. The ballroom was empty. The band had stepped out for a break. The string trio was outside, on the veranda. Yvette and her assistants were in the kitchen, running the final timing of the first course with the catering captain. I walked the perimeter of the room the way I walk a treatment room before a shift, scanning. Linens? Square. Centerpieces? Level. Chargers? Evenly spaced. Place cards? Calligraphy clean. I reached table 1. I picked up the first card. The name on it was Hollings Calloway. I picked up the next card. Madeline Calloway. I picked up the next. Bradford Ashford Bellamy. The next. Lindsay Ashford Bellamy. The next. Justin Stovall. The next. Rebecca Stovall. The next. Edmund Ashford Bellamy. The next. Camilla Ashford Bellamy. The next. Margaret Ashford Bellamy. The next. Genevieve Ashford Bellamy, Tucker's first cousin from Connecticut, a woman I had met exactly once at the engagement party for under 3 minutes. 10 cards. No Donnellys. I felt my breath shorten. I am not a person who panics. I work with frightened 7-year-olds for a living. I keep my voice level when a parent in my chair is having a difficult morning. But I felt, standing at table 1 with 10 unfamiliar cards in my hand, the very specific physical sensation of the floor of a situation falling out from under me. I set the cards down. I walked to table 2. I checked. I walked to table 3. I checked. I walked the perimeter, table by table, scanning, until I reached the rear corner of the room, the corner farthest from the dance floor, pressed up against the wall that separated the ballroom from the kitchen pass and the service hallway. Table 18. Frank Donnelly. Mary Donnelly. Aunt Trudy. Margaret Odell, my mother's coworker from the library. Henry Odell, her husband. Karen Pelletier, the widow of my father's old mentor, Walter. The Hendersons from 3 doors down on Larkspur. 2 empty seats reserved for older Donnelly cousins who, I would learn later, had been unable to make it from Cleveland. The table was a banquet round, draped in the same ivory linen as the rest of the room. But the chairs around it were not the gilded Chiavari chairs that surrounded the other 17 tables in the ballroom. They were padded folding chairs, the backup kind that catering companies bring when the rental count comes in a few short. The chandelier directly above the table was not a chandelier at all. It was a simple, recessed, fluorescent ceiling fixture, slightly cooler in color than the warm hanging lights over the rest of the room, casting that particular pale, slightly clinical light that gives faces a tired cast. 8 feet from table 18, the swinging door to the kitchen pass stood propped half open with a rubber wedge, and through the gap, I could hear the clatter of plates being stacked onto a tray. 3 feet to the left of my father's place card stood a metal rolling cart loaded with 2 stacked gray bus tubs, one of them streaked along the inside with the dark, wet residue of stemware that had been used the night before. Behind the cart, in the shadow of the column at the corner of the room, was a single black trash can with a foot pedal, the kind used by catering staff to clear scraped plates. I looked at the place card. Frank Donnelly. The same calligraphy, the same paper stock, the same gold ink. My father, who had worked 38 years in other people's basements and crawl spaces and electrical rooms so that his daughter could go to college, so that his daughter could one day stand in a dress she had bought herself in a ballroom paid for, in part, by his someday account, was being seated next to a foot-pedaled trash can. I had stopped being able to feel my hands. I walked back to the front of the room, found Yvette in the hallway outside the kitchen pass, and asked her, in a voice that I am proud in retrospect to say did not shake, when the seating chart had been altered. Yvette did not blink. She looked, in fact, faintly relieved that this question was finally being asked. She said, "Mrs. Ashford Bellamy reviewed the chart this morning at 9 and made some adjustments. She mentioned she had spoken with you about it on the phone yesterday afternoon and that you had approved." I had not spoken with Camilla on the phone yesterday afternoon. I had not approved anything. I told Yvette this. Yvette held my gaze for a beat longer than was strictly comfortable, nodded once, and said, "I see. Would you like me to make a correction?" I told her not yet. I told her I would handle it. She watched me walk away with an expression on her face that I would, only much later, recognize as the particular pity of a woman who had seen this scene play out before, who knew what was coming, and who had been forbidden by 20 years of professional discretion from warning me about it. I went looking for Tucker. I had not yet at that point decided what I was going to do. I had not yet at that point fully understood what had happened. I think I still believed, walking down that corridor in my own wedding dress, that I was walking toward an error to be corrected. That my fiancé would say, "Oh my God, my mother did what? No, absolutely not. Sit them at table 1. Move whoever needs to be moved. I'll talk to her myself." I had spent 2 years of my life trusting that Tucker, when it counted, would close the distance between us and his mother. I had spent 2 years preparing this exact test of him in the back of my mind in the quiet hours before sleep, without ever fully admitting to myself that I was preparing it. The test had finally arrived, and I was now walking toward it. I found him in the groom's suite at the end of the corridor. He was alone. He was standing in front of a tall mirror, adjusting the small silver knot of his cufflink, the ones his mother had given him the night before at the rehearsal dinner. He looked up when I came in. He smiled. He said, "Hey, beautiful." I closed the door behind me. I said, "Who moved my parents off the head table?" His smile flattened, but only slightly. He turned back to the mirror. He said, "Mom rearranged a couple of things this morning. It is not a big deal." I said, "Tucker, they are sitting next to the kitchen door. They are at the back of the room. The chairs do not match the rest of the room. There is a bin of dirty dishes 3 feet from where my father is going to eat dinner tonight." He sighed. It was a sigh I knew. I had heard it many times by then. It was the sigh of a man performing patience with what he had decided was an unreasonable woman. "Beth, we have 180 people about to walk into a ballroom. Can we just get through dinner, and I will sort this out with her tomorrow." He said tomorrow. He always said tomorrow. Tomorrow was the word that had defined every confrontation I had failed to have with his mother for 2 years. I said, "There is no tomorrow on this. There is now. My father drove 45 minutes here in the only suit he owns. My mother stayed up until 2 in the morning last night repressing her dress. My parents wrote a check for $11,500 from a savings account it took them 13 years to fill. Your mother put them next to the trash, Tucker." He turned from the mirror. He took 2 steps toward me. He put his hands lightly on my upper arms. he said, in a low, slightly indulgent tone, the same tone he used in client meetings when he was about to talk a small business owner into a credit product he did not entirely need. "Beth, you are overwhelmed. This is a huge day. It is going to be okay. Mom has reasons for everything. The Callaways are very important to my father's deal with the Stovall Group, the one that closes in November. He has been working on this for 2 years. The seating at table 1 was, frankly, more political than I had realized. Mom is just trying to make sure the right people are honored. Your parents are wonderful. They are. They are going to be fine wherever they sit. They are tough people." I asked him to say the last sentence again. I asked him because, in the moment, I was not sure whether I had heard it correctly. He looked briefly, mildly annoyed at having to repeat himself, and he said, again, more slowly, like he was being patient with someone slow on the uptake, "Your parents are tough people. They are going to be fine wherever they sit." I removed his hands from my arms. I told him I would see him at the reception. I walked out of the groom's suite, and I did not look back. I walked, instead, back toward the lobby of the country club. There is a long corridor at the front of the building, lined with windows, that runs from the bridal area to the main entrance of the club. Along that corridor, on a low side table draped with a cream runner, sat the small stack of printed wedding programs that the guests had picked up on their way into the ceremony. They were ivory cardstock, folded once, with our names in deep navy ink across the front in a tasteful flowing script. I had approved the proof of those programs 5 weeks before the wedding. I had spent 20 minutes one Sunday afternoon at my parents' kitchen table, going line by line through every word of the inside text with my mother. The inside text was an acknowledgments page. "With deepest love and gratitude," it had begun, the original draft. "To Frank and Mary Donnelly, whose sacrifices over many years made this celebration possible. To Margaret Ashford Bellamy, whose grace and warmth have welcomed Beth into our family. To Edmund and Camilla Ashford Bellamy, whose generosity made the day itself a possibility." I picked up a program from the table. I opened it. I went directly to the acknowledgments page. It read, in the same deep navy ink, in the same tasteful script, "With love and gratitude. To Edmund and Camilla Ashford Bellamy. To Margaret Ashford Bellamy. To Bradford and Lindsay Ashford Bellamy. To the Ashford Bellamy Family Foundation." 4 lines. All Ashford Bellamy. The Donnellys were not present anywhere on the page. They had not been moved further down. They had not been listed in smaller type. They had simply been removed. I picked up a second program from the stack to make sure. The same. A third program. The same. I stood in that corridor holding a stack of 3 programs, and I understood, for the first time in 2 years, the entirety of what Camilla Ashford Bellamy thought of my family, and what she had decided to do with that opinion on the day that she had been required, by social convention only, to include them in her son's wedding. I went to find Jo. She was sitting on a velvet bench in the small lounge outside the bridesmaid's suite, scrolling on her phone. She looked up. She read my face. She put her phone away without looking at it again. She said, "What did he say?" I told her. I told her about the table. I told her about the chairs. I told her about the bus cart. I told her about Tucker's sentence about my parents being tough people. I told her about the programs. I told her in maybe 90 seconds, without crying, in the kind of clean, low, factual voice I would use to report a finding to a colleague. Jo listened without interrupting. When I was done, She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say anything for several seconds. Then she said, "Okay, listen to me. The marriage license. Has it been signed?" I had not signed it yet. The signing had been scheduled, at Camilla's specific request, to happen during the reception, between the dinner course and the cake cutting, as a small public moment in front of the assembled guests, with Edmund and one of Tucker's cousins as the witnesses. Yvette had the document in a leather folio in the small office off the kitchen pass. I had seen her place it there myself, around 11 that morning, when she was running through the timeline with me one last time. Joe said, "Then you are not married. Whatever happened in front of that officiant an hour ago was a ceremony. A beautiful ceremony. It is not a marriage in the eyes of the state of Pennsylvania until that license is signed, witnessed, and filed. You walk out of here today without signing that document, and there is nothing to undo. No annulment, no divorce. The state will simply have no record. Do you understand me?" I said I did. She said, "Beth, I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what your options are. You have until that license is brought out and you are publicly asked to sign it. After that, the social pressure to do it in front of 180 people will be extreme. You need to make your decision before you sit down at the sweetheart table. And once you make it, I am right here, whatever you decide. I have known you since we were 19 years old. I am not going anywhere." I went looking for my parents. I found them on the small side patio off the cocktail veranda. They had stepped outside because my mother had needed to take a beta blocker and a sip of water in private, and my father had wanted to give her a moment. They both turned when they saw me. My father straightened. He had that look on his face that he had had during my high school graduation when I had walked across the stage, the one where his pride and his discomfort at being in a place like this fought each other to a draw. My mother had her library cardigan over her dress because she had been a little cold on the patio. I had asked her, gently, on the drive over, whether she might leave the cardigan in the car. She had said yes. She had retrieved it, I now realized, from the coat check at some point during the ceremony hour. I said, "I need you both to come with me for a minute." My father said, "Sweetheart, is everything all right?" I said, "I just need a minute with both of you." I led them down the side corridor toward the small library room at the back of the country club. A quiet room with leather chairs and walls of books that nobody had read in 50 years, and I closed the door behind us, and I told them. I told them about the table. I told them about the chairs. I told them about the bus cart. I told them about the program. I told them about Tucker's sentence. I told them about Joe. I did not, in that moment, tell them what I was thinking of doing about it, because I had not, in that moment, finished deciding. My mother put her hand over her mouth. My father stood very still. He looked for a long moment at the carpet. Then he looked up at me. He said only one thing. He said, "Beth, your mom and I will sit anywhere they want to put us. You do what is right for you. You do not do anything on account of us. You hear me?" He had said the same sentence in the hallway 4 hours earlier. He had meant the same thing. He meant, even now, in a back room of a country club where his name had been removed from his own daughter's wedding program, that he had not come here today to make me choose. He had come here today to watch me get married. And if I wanted to walk out of this room and back to table 18 and eat my dinner from a plate in the shadow of a service cart, and laugh and dance and pretend none of this had happened, my father was, even then, willing to do that for me. without complaint, without a word. That was the moment something inside me, finally, snapped clean. I went to find Camilla. I did not, in retrospect, plan what I was going to say to her. I think I went looking for her because, at the moment I closed the door of that small library room with my parents inside it, I needed to look her in the face exactly once before I made the decision I had already, somewhere underneath myself, made. I needed to see whether, faced with me, faced with what she had done, faced with the possibility of being asked to undo it, she would step back. I do not know what I would have done if she had. I do not have to know, because she did not. I found her on the veranda, holding a champagne flute in the middle of a small cluster of women that included Tucker's Aunt Lindsay and a woman I did not recognize. They were laughing softly about something. Camilla saw me coming. She smoothed her face into the welcoming smile she used at gala events. She said, "There she is, the most beautiful girl in the room. Beth, darling, come meet Margaret Henley." I did not look at Margaret Henley. I said, "Camilla, could I speak with you privately for a minute?" Her smile flickered, briefly, then resettled. She said, "Of course, sweetheart. Excuse me, ladies." I led her around the corner of the veranda, where the buildings stepped out around a low brick planter, where there was no one within 30 feet of us. I said, "Why are my parents at table 18? She tilted her head slightly. She said, "Oh, Beth, we had to make a few small adjustments this morning. Edmund's relationship with the Callaways is at a delicate point in the negotiation. It made the most sense to honor them at the head table. I assumed Yvette had spoken with you. Your parents are dear people. They are perfectly well placed where they are." I said, "They are at the back of the room, next to the kitchen. Their chairs do not match. There is a bin of dirty dishes 3 feet from my father's seat." She blinked. She tilted her head the other way. She said, in a tone I will hear in my head for the rest of my life, "Beth, dear, your parents are not the kind of people who notice these things. They will be perfectly happy. Frank is, I imagine, just delighted to be here." I asked her to repeat that sentence. She did, almost. She said, more carefully this time, "Your father strikes me as a man who does not stand on ceremony, Beth."
I cannot imagine he is going to be wounded by the seating arrangement.
I said, "Camilla, do you know what my father does for a living?" She said, "I do, yes. Tucker has mentioned it. He is an electrician. Wonderful trade. A very honorable trade." I said, "He has been an electrician for 38 years. He has rewired half this county. He paid off his house in 22 years with his hands. He saved, with my mother, $11,500 in cash over 13 years to contribute to this wedding. That is the money paying for the bar at your son's reception tonight. The champagne in your hand is from my father's bank account. So when you ask me whether my father is going to be wounded by the seating arrangement, I want you to understand that I do not need you to evaluate whether he will be wounded. I am wounded. And I do not believe my parents need to be the kind of people who notice these things, Camilla. I believe their daughter needs to be." She started to speak. I held up my hand. I said, "I am not finished. You will, in the next 10 minutes, instruct Yvette to move my parents, Aunt Trudy, and Margaret to table 1. You will, in the next 10 minutes, instruct her to reprint the programs with my parents' names restored. You will, in the next 10 minutes, walk over to my father, and you will apologize to his face for the seating arrangement, and you will tell him you got it wrong. If any one of those 3 things does not happen in the next 10 minutes, you and I will not be family. Do you understand me?" She looked at me for a long, long moment. She said, very quietly, with the kind of low, precise voice she had probably been using since she was 11 years old in a private school dining room, "Beth, you should be careful how you speak to me. You are about to be a part of this family. There are certain expectations that come with that." I said, "Camilla, look at my face. I am not about to be a part of anything." I turned around. I went back down the corridor. I went to find Tucker. I found him in the groom's suite again. He was standing with his back to the door, talking quietly into his phone. His voice was low and clipped. I caught the last sentence as I came in, before he turned. He said, "I know, Mom. I know. She is being ridiculous. I will handle her. Just give me 10 minutes. Yes. Yes. I know. Look, the Callaways are not going anywhere. I will fix it. I will. I love you." He turned. He saw me. He had the grace, briefly, to look caught. Then his face settled into the rehearsed, concerned fiancé expression. He said, "Beth, hey! I was just about to come find you. Listen, I think we need to take a breath." I said, "Tucker, I want you to tell me, in your own words, with no audience, whether you knew my parents had been moved off the head table before I walked into this suite an hour ago." He hesitated. I said, "Tucker, yes or no?" He said, "Beth, it is not that simple." I said, "It is exactly that simple.
Yes or no? Did you know?
He said, "Yes, I knew. Mom told me last night at the rehearsal dinner." I said, "Tucker, your mother told you last night at the rehearsal dinner that she was going to move my parents to the back of the room next to the kitchen, and you did not tell me?" He said, "She did not say it that way. She said she was making some adjustments. I did not know what they were specifically." I said, "Did you, at any point between the rehearsal dinner last night and now, walk into the ballroom and look at the chart?" He said, "Yes." I said, "And you saw?" He said, "Yes." I said, "And you said nothing to me?" He said, "Beth, I was going to talk to her about it after the wedding. I just did not want to fight with her right before the ceremony. You have to understand, my mother is who she is. We were going to have our own life after today." I said, "Tucker, I want you to know something. I have spent 2 years explaining you to myself. I have spent 2 years explaining your mother to myself. I have spent 2 years saying to my best friend, to my own parents, to myself, that you were going to choose me when it mattered. I want you to know, before I go back out there, that you did not. You chose her last night when she told you what she was planning. You chose her this morning when you walked into that ballroom and saw the chart and said nothing. You chose her 10 minutes ago when I came into this room and asked you to fix it, and you told me my parents were tough people. You have chosen her in every single one of the small moments that, when added together, are what a marriage actually is. And I am not going to stand at a sweetheart table tonight and sign my name to a piece of paper that pretends you did not." He stared at me. He said, "Beth, you are not seriously." I said, "I am." He said, "In front of all these people?" I said, "Yes, Tucker, in front of all these people." I left him standing there. I walked back the corridor. I went to the small library room. My parents were still in there, sitting in the leather chairs, my mother's hand on my father's wrist. I closed the door behind me. I said, "Mom, Dad, I am about to do something. I do not need you to approve it. I do not need you to talk me out of it. I am telling you only because it is going to involve you, and I do not want you to be surprised. Are you with me?" My father stood up. He looked at me. He said, "Beth, I have been with you since the day you were born." I went to find Yvette. I told her I needed exactly 2 things from her. First, the leather folio with the marriage license inside it. Second, the microphone. She did not ask why. She brought me the folio. She walked me to the small anteroom behind the band's dais. She handed me a wireless lavalier microphone and a small clip, the kind she used to mic the officiant during the ceremony, and she clipped it carefully to the neckline of my dress. She tested it briefly with her own earpiece. She nodded once. She said, "Whenever you are ready, dear." She had still not asked. I walked back to the ballroom. The doors had opened. The guests had been filing in for cocktails for a while now. People were standing in small clusters, holding their drinks, finding their tables. I saw from the corner of my eye my parents walk in through the main doors, Aunt Trudy behind them, and begin to make their way toward the back of the room. I saw Dr. Pack, my dentist boss, see them go and watch them with the same expression she had whenever a patient was about to deliver a diagnosis she did not want to hear. I saw Camilla at the bar with Lindsay, laughing again. I saw Tucker emerge from the corridor at the side of the room and begin to walk toward the head table. I saw Joe, standing alone by the door, watching me. I walked to the front of the band dais. The trio of musicians, who had been chatting quietly in their tuning chairs, looked up. The conductor saw the microphone clipped to my dress and the folio in my hand and, after a beat, gave me a small, careful nod, as if to say, "The floor is yours." I stepped up onto the low platform. I tapped the small mic at my collar twice. I heard the soft, amplified knock through the speakers in the room. The conversation in the ballroom dropped, in waves, table by table, the way it does. People turned. People who had been laughing about something stopped mid-sentence. The band conductor leaned slightly forward in his chair. Jordan, the friend of Tucker's who was supposed to MC the reception, who had been standing near the dais with a folder of bullet points in his hand, took one step back from me. I think he could see something in my face. He was, despite being Tucker's college friend, a smart enough man not to interrupt it. I said, into the mic, very evenly, "Hello. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Beth Donnelly. Most of you do not know me very well, because most of you are friends of the Ashford Bellamy family. I want you to know that. The bar that is currently serving the cocktails in your hand is paid for by my parents, Frank and Mary Donnelly, who saved the money for it over 13 years out of what my father calls the someday account. The band that is going to play your dinner music tonight is also paid for by Frank and Mary Donnelly. I want you to know that, too. Because most of you do not know it." The room was quiet now, properly quiet. I could hear, faintly, the kitchen door swing shut at the back of the room and the soft click of one woman's earring against her champagne glass at table 4. I said, "I want you to do me a favor. I want all of you to look toward the back of the room, please. At the table closest to the kitchen. That is table 18. Sitting at that table are my parents and my aunt and several of the people I have known for the longest in my life. I want you to take a good, long look. The room turned. I will tell you that the room turned. 180 heads, every neck twisting, every face slowly registering in waves of small adjustments what they were looking at. The folding chairs, the dim corner, the kitchen door, the bus cart with the bin on top of it. My father, sitting upright with his hands flat on the table, his jaw set in the dignity of a man who has been told his whole life that he is supposed to be grateful for whatever room he is in. My mother, looking down at the corner of her napkin, smoothing it with her thumb, because she did not know where else to look. I said, "When I approved the seating chart for this wedding 3 weeks ago, my parents were at table 1, front and center, which is where the parents of the bride are usually seated. Sometime between yesterday evening and 10 o'clock this morning, the seating chart was changed. My parents were moved to table 18. They were given folding chairs. They were placed next to the kitchen and a bus cart. The person who made this decision did not consult me. The person who made this decision is sitting at table 1 tonight in the seat that I had assigned to my mother." I let the room sit with that. Camilla, at the bar, very slowly set down her champagne flute on the marble counter behind her without taking her eyes off me. Edmund, at table 1, where he had not yet sat down, took one small step backward, as if instinctively distancing himself from a chair I had just made radioactive. Hollings Calloway, at the same table, looked over at his wife with the unmistakable, slightly puzzled expression of a man who has just realized he is in the middle of someone else's argument and would like to be at a different table. I said, "I went to find my fiancé about this an hour ago. I asked him to fix it. He told me my parents were tough people and that they would be fine wherever they sat. I asked him whether he had known about the change. He told me, just now, in the groom's suite, that he had known since last night. That he had walked into this room this morning and seen the chart and seen what his mother had done and decided, deliberately, not to tell me. He decided he did not want to fight with his mother before the ceremony." I looked over at Tucker. He had stopped midway between the corridor and the head table. He was standing perfectly still. He was, I would understand later, the only person in the room who knew exactly what was coming, because he was the only person in the room who knew me. I said, "I want to say something to my parents now, and then I am going to be done. Dad, Mom, I love you. I am sorry I let any of this go on as long as it has. I have spent the last 2 years telling you both that you would be welcome in this family. I have spent the last 2 years asking you, both of you, to swallow small unkindnesses from people who have more money than manners. I have spent the last 2 years promising you that I knew what I was doing. I did not. I do now. I want you to know I do now. And I want you to know that the only thing you have ever taught me wrong in my entire life is that some people deserve more respect than you do. I want you to know I do not believe that anymore." My mother started crying at table 18. My father did not move. He was looking at me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the same expression he had had on the day I had walked across the stage at my dental hygiene graduation. The same expression he had had on the day I had handed him the final receipt from the loan servicer for my school debt, paid in full. The expression of a father who had stopped, finally, being able to hide that he was proud. I lifted the leather folio. I opened it on the small reading podium that was set up at the front of the dais. Inside was the marriage license. untouched. 2 empty signature lines. I said, "Everyone at this wedding deserves to know that this document has not been signed. The ceremony was beautiful, and it was real to the people who witnessed it. But it was not, under Pennsylvania law, a legal marriage until I signed this piece of paper. I am not going to sign this piece of paper. I am not going to marry Tucker Ashford Bellamy tonight, or any other night. I want to thank each of you for the time you took to come here today. I want to wish all of the Ashford Bellamy family well. I want to apologize to my own guests for what is about to be a very awkward evening for everyone. There is food, there is wine, the room is paid for. Please, if you would like to, stay and eat. The bride and the bride's family are going to walk out now." I closed the folio. I unclipped the microphone from my dress. I set it down very gently on the lectern. I stepped down from the dais. I walked the long, very long, 90 feet across the ballroom toward table 18. The string trio, which had been waiting for their cue to begin the dinner set, did not begin it. The band, on the dais behind me, did not move. The room did not, in the way movies tell you a room will, erupt. The room simply held its breath. My father stood up at table 18 as I approached. My mother stood up. Aunt Trudy stood up. The Odells stood up. Karen Pelletier stood up. The Hendersons from 3 doors down on Larkspur stood up. Dr. Pack at table 13 stood up. Jo, by the door, was already on her feet. The Donnelly half of the room, table by table, the cousins, the apprentices, the library co-workers, stood up. Not all at once, in quiet, small waves, the way people stand in church. I reached my father. I put my arms around him. He put his arms around me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. After a mother joined us. After a moment, Aunt Trudy. We stood like that, in the corner of a ballroom, by a foot-pedaled trash can, for what was probably 10 seconds and felt like the entirety of my adult life. Then we walked out. Jo met us at the door. Yvette, to her credit, met us in the lobby with my coat and my mother's cardigan and my parents' coats already in her arms. She did not say anything. She just handed them to us. She held the door for my father. Behind us, in the ballroom, I heard, faintly, Camilla say, in a voice that had cracked for the first time in 2 years, "Tucker, do something." I heard Tucker's footsteps start toward the door. I heard them stop halfway. I heard Edmund say, quite clearly into the silence of 180 witnesses, "Tucker, sit down. You have done enough today." I do not know whether that sentence from Tucker's father was the first kind thing Edmund ever said to me. I do not know whether he meant it kindly, or whether he meant it as a rebuke, or whether he meant it as the cold operational order of a man finally separating himself, in public, from the choices his son had made. I have decided, in the years since, not to assign it a motive. It was the first true sentence I had ever heard a member of the Ashford Bellamy family say in front of me, and that is enough. We drove home in my father's Ford Ranger. My mother sat in the middle of the bench seat between us. Aunt Trudy followed behind us in her own car. Jo rode home with her own boyfriend, who had come down from the city for the wedding. The drive from the country club to Larkspur was 46 minutes. Nobody spoke for the first 20. Then my mother, very quietly, said, "Beth, honey, I am so sorry." I said, "Mom, stop. That is not the way to start this conversation." She said, "I know. I said, "I know." We did not speak again for the rest of the drive.
I will tell you now what happened afterward because I know you are wondering. Jo confirmed, on Monday, what she had told me in the corridor. There was no marriage license. There was no marriage. There was nothing to undo. There was no annulment to file. There was no divorce. There was simply a Saturday in October when, by all available legal documentation, Beth Donnelly had gone to a country club, attended a ceremony, and gone home. I moved out of the apartment above the flower shop and back into my parents' house on Larkspur for 6 weeks, while I broke the lease and sorted out the small joint financial accounts Tucker and I had opened over the previous year. There was less to untangle than I had feared. I had insisted, on Joe's advice the year before, on keeping our finances mostly separate before the wedding. Tucker had agreed, with the bored agreement of a man who had not thought it would matter. On the second Friday in November, 5 weeks after the wedding that did not happen, I woke up at 6 in the morning in my old bedroom and walked to the bathroom and was sick. I was sick again at 1 in the afternoon. By the following Wednesday, I had taken a test at the small pharmacy on Bridge Street, where the pharmacist, Mr. Garibaldi, had known my father since 1986, who put the box into a paper bag without ringing it up at the register where other customers were standing, and walked me back to the counter at the rear of the store to ring me up there. I sat on the toilet lid of my parents' upstairs bathroom and watched 2 pink lines come up. I sat there for a long time. I did not feel any of the things you are supposed to feel. I felt, instead, the very precise, very calm sense of a person who has been handed a long letter and has not yet opened it, but already understands that her life is about to be reorganized around what is inside. I told my mother first. She did not cry. She made me a cup of tea. She said only, "We will figure this out. We will figure all of it out." I told my father that night, after dinner, on the back porch. He sat for a long moment with his hands on his knees. Then he said, "Beth, are you all right?" I said, "I think so, Dad. I think I am going to be." He nodded once. He said, "Then we are too." I told Tucker by email 3 days later, through Joe's office, in a letter Joe helped me draft. I told him I was pregnant. I told him I intended to carry the pregnancy. I told him that any communication going forward on the subject of the child or any other subject would need to go through Joe. I told him I would not be open at any point to reconciling the relationship that had ended at the country club on October 5th, and that any communication that attempted to negotiate that point would be returned unanswered. Tucker's first reply was an apology. He said he had not slept. He said he had been a coward. He said he was, in his words, breaking apart. He asked to see me. Tucker's second reply, the next day, was different. It said he had spoken with his family's attorney. It said that the Ashford-Bellamy family had certain expectations regarding the upbringing of a Bellamy grandchild. It said that any attempt on my part to limit his access to his child would be met with the full resources of the firm of Ravensworth, Hadley, Stewart, the firm his family had been on retainer with since 1971. It was signed, sincerely, with his initials only, the way he had signed business emails. I forwarded both replies to Joe. Joe replied with a single sentence. She wrote, "Beth, that second email is the best thing he could have done for our case. They are going to lose this." On a Tuesday in mid-December, Camilla called my parents' house. The number she used had not been in our records. My father answered. He told me afterward what he had said. He had said, very evenly, Mrs. Ashford Bellamy, I am not the person to have this conversation. My daughter has an attorney named Jolene Reyes who works in Pittsburgh. You may call Miss Reyes. You may not call this house again." He hung up. The phone did not ring again from that number for the rest of the day. In late January, when I was almost 5 months pregnant, Edmund Ashford Bellamy sent me a letter, through the regular mail, addressed in his own handwriting. The handwriting was very neat, the kind a man learns at a boarding school. I opened it at my parents' kitchen table. My mother was making coffee. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. He wrote, "Beth, I do not write to ask anything of you. I want instead to apologize for something specific. On the morning of the wedding, I knew the seating chart had been changed. Camilla had told me at breakfast. I did not approve of it. I also did not say so, because in our marriage, we have not, for many years, fought about her decisions in the social arena. I considered the seating chart a small thing in the larger picture, and I told myself, you would understand. I was wrong on both counts. I am sorry for the table. I am sorry for what my son said to you in the groom's suite, which I have since learned about in detail. I am sorry for what my wife said to you on the patio. I am sorry for the program. I want you to know that I have, over the past 3 months, undertaken a substantial review of the way our family conducts itself. I do not expect this letter to mean anything to you. I would like you to have it anyway. If, at some point in the future, however distant, you decide that you would be willing to receive a different kind of communication from me, I am at your father's disposal as to how to begin it. Sincerely, Edmund Ashford Bellamy." I read the letter twice. I folded it back into thirds. I put it into the drawer of my mother's sideboard, where she keeps the cards she does not throw away. I did not reply. I have, in the 3 years since, still not replied. I keep the letter in the drawer. I have read it perhaps 8 more times. It is the only piece of correspondence I have kept from any of them. The wedding itself had consequences I did not anticipate and did not orchestrate. I want to be clear about that. I did not, after the wedding, post a single thing on social media. I did not call anyone at the country club. I did not write any open letters. I did not give an interview to the local paper. I went home to Larkspur. I shut my own life down for 6 weeks. I went back to work at Dr. Pack's practice in mid-November, and I focused on my pregnancy. The fallout, such as it was, came from the room. Hollings Calloway, who had been seated at table 1 in my mother's seat, withdrew in early December from a real estate financing partnership he had been on the verge of finalizing with Edmund's bank. The deal had been described in the Regional Business Journal the month before as the largest commercial credit package the bank had structured in 5 years. The withdrawal was attributed, in a follow-up piece, to shifting priorities at the partner firm. The reporter who wrote the piece, a woman named Penelope Yost, who I went to high school with, knew exactly what those shifting priorities were and chose, in print, to be polite about it. Penelope ran into me at the Westmont Christmas market in early December. She did not bring up the article. She bought a cup of mulled cider and stood with me for 10 minutes watching the small carousel turn. Before she left, she said only, "Beth, I'm glad to see you doing well. That's all." I have not forgotten that 10 minutes. In late January, the Children's Welfare Society of Westmoreland County held an unusually quiet board meeting. Camilla, who had chaired the board for 16 years, was, in the meeting's minutes, transitioned to emeritus status. The next gala, in April, did not list her name on the program. Edmund attended alone and gave the keynote. I did not see any of this firsthand.
I heard about it from my mother, who heard about it from a woman she works with at the library, whose husband had been on the board for 9 years. The woman, whose name is Diane, walked up to my mother at circulation one Monday morning in February, took her hand briefly and said, "Mary, just so you know, the board is not all of them." That, also, was a sentence I have not forgotten. I gave birth on a Thursday in June at the small regional hospital in Greensburg. Nora Frances Donnelly, 7 pounds 4 ounces, 20 inches, a small dimple in her left cheek. Frank as a middle name does not exist. Frances comes close. My father held her, after the nurses, after my mother, and he sat in the corner chair of the recovery room for a long time without saying anything. He did not cry exactly, but the muscles around his mouth did something I have not seen him do since the day his own father died, in 1996. He sat in that corner with my daughter, 8 pounds of new person in his hands. He kept saying, very softly, "Hi, sweetheart. Hi. Hi." He said it maybe 40 times. I think he was trying to introduce her to the world. I think he was trying to introduce himself. The custody arrangement was finalized in family court in early September. Tucker receives Nora 2 weekends a month and 1 extended visit per quarter. He picks her up on Fridays at 6 and returns her on Sundays at 5. He is, in the years since, a man trying very hard. I will say that, because it is true. He has not, to my knowledge, missed a pickup. He calls during the week. He pays support on time. He sends, twice a year, photographs of Nora at their family events that have, at his request and my agreement, been small and quiet. No country clubs, no large gatherings, no Ashford Bellamy's other than Edmund. Camilla is not part of Nora's life. Not because I have forbidden it, because Camilla, when offered the chance, declined the conditions, which were that any visit with her must take place at my parents' home with my parents present, and that any disparaging remark about my family in front of Nora would end the visits immediately. Camilla called these conditions, in a letter she sent through her own attorney, insulting. I called them, in a single sentence in my reply, also through Joe, non-negotiable. We have not spoken since. Edmund sees Nora 4 times a year. He drives to Westmont. He sits at my parents' kitchen table. He drinks coffee out of the same chipped mug everyone in our family drinks coffee out of. He brings her every time a small book, age-appropriate, picked out himself. He stays exactly an hour. He does not ask for more. He says thank you when he leaves. The first time he came, my father met him on the front porch and shook his hand and said, "Mr. Ashford Bellamy?" Edmund had said, "Frank, I would prefer Edmund if you can manage it." My father had nodded slowly and had not, at that visit, taken him up on it. By the 3rd visit, my father, very deliberately, said, "Come in, Edmund." That was 18 months ago. They are not friends. They will not, probably, ever be friends. But they have an arrangement, and the arrangement is good for Nora, and that is enough. Nora is now 2 years and 3 months old. She has very dark hair, and her father's nose, and her grandmother's quiet, careful way of watching a room before she enters it. She knows the words yes and no, and milk, and mama, and pop, which is what she calls my father. She does not yet know the word Tucker. She knows the word dada, which is what she calls Tucker on the weekends she is with him, in the small, bright apartment he has rented in a converted carriage house near my parents' street, specifically so that he can be a 5-minute drive away. I bought a small townhouse on the edge of Westmont last spring, with a down payment I had saved over 2 years and a 30-year mortgage from a credit union that is not, for many reasons, the Ashford Bellamy Bank. The townhouse has 2 bedrooms and a small back patio and a magnolia tree in the front yard that I planted myself with my father over a long Saturday in April. My parents' house is 6 minutes away by car. Dr. Pak made me a partner in the dental practice at the end of last year. My name is on the door now, in vinyl letters next to hers, which still feels, when I park out front in the morning, like a small daily miracle. On Sundays, we eat dinner at my parents' kitchen table on Larkspur. There are 6 chairs around that table, and none of them match. My father's chair is the wooden one with the carved back that he refinished in 2011 from a yard sale 2 streets over. My mother's chair has the needlepoint cushion she made the year I was in high school. My chair is an old folding chair from my grandparents' farmhouse in Erie, the kind with the wooden seat and the metal hinge. Nora's chair is a small wooden booster my father built her out of scrap maple in the basement. Aunt Trudy's chair, when she comes down from Erie, is the kitchen step stool with a folded towel on top, because Aunt Trudy says it makes her feel taller, and that the rest of us are spoiled by sitting in chairs with backs. Joe comes for dinner roughly every other Sunday, with Carter, who is now her husband. Dr. Pak and her husband come for dinner once a month. My mother makes pot roast, or her chicken and dumplings, or, when it is hot in the summer, a cold pasta salad with vegetables from the garden in the back. There are no place cards. There are no chargers. There is no string trio. There is, sometimes, when my father is feeling particularly festive, the small Bluetooth speaker we got him for Christmas the year before last, playing Glenn Miller from his phone. The light over the dining table is the same brass fixture that has been there since 1978. And the bulb on the left side flickers sometimes, and my father says he will replace it this weekend, the way he has been saying he will replace it for the entire time I have been alive. There is no seat in that kitchen that is the bad seat. There is no chair next to the trash. There is no service entrance. Every single person who sits down at that table sat down because they were specifically invited and specifically loved. There is no table 18 on Larkspur Street. There is no possibility of a table 18 on Larkspur Street. The architecture of the room, the architecture of the family, does not allow for one. I am 32 years old now. I am the partner in a small dental practice in a small town in western Pennsylvania. I am a single mother of a small, dark-haired girl who has never, not once, in any room of her life, been made to feel that she is in the wrong seat. I am the daughter of Frank and Mary Donnelly, who have given me, over the course of 32 years, a model of love so quiet and so reliable and so unembarrassed that it took me 2 years of dating an entirely different model to recognize what I had been given. I am not telling you this story to teach you anything specific. Every family is different. Every breaking point is different. I do not know what your table 18 looks like, but if you are sitting in one tonight, listening to me, I want you to know one thing. The signal was always going to come. The signal had been coming, in my case, for 2 years. The smile at the engagement party, the comment about my mother's casserole, the omission from the announcement, the polite suggestion about the seamstress in New York. Each of them, in isolation, could be explained away. Each of them, in isolation, I did explain away. The wedding day was not a single dramatic event. The wedding day was simply the day the volume came up. If the people you love are being treated as a problem to be managed by the family you were about to marry into, that is the family. That is not an oversight. That is not a rough patch. That is not a difficult mother-in-law you will charm into liking you over time. That is a forecast. If the person you are about to marry hears his mother call your father poor in a private room away from the audience and says, you are right. Then that person has already chosen which side of his life he is going to live on. He has chosen it long before the seating chart. The seating chart is just the proof. The seating chart is the thing the rest of us can see. I did not, on October 5th, win a victory. I want to be clear about that too. I did not get revenge. I did not destroy the Ashford-Bellamy family. I did not bring down a bank. The Ashford-Bellamys are still wealthy. Camilla is still chairing things, just smaller things. Edmund is still running the bank. Tucker is still managing his book of clients. They are all, in the various senses in which their world measures success, fine. What happened on October 5th is not the kind of thing you score. What happened on October 5th is that one specific woman, in one specific town, on the day of her own wedding, refused, in front of 180 witnesses, to add her signature to a piece of paper that would have asked her to spend the next 40 years pretending her parents were not, in fact, her parents. That is not revenge. That is geometry. That is the line, drawn very late, that should have been drawn much earlier. But that, when it was finally drawn, was drawn cleanly. If you have a person in your life whose family treats the people you love as a problem, and that person agrees with them in private, that person is not going to choose you when it matters. The reception is going to be a beautiful room. The flowers are going to be in tall vases. The trio is going to play something slow and elegant. The food is going to be served on plates with gold rims, and the people who raised you are going to sit at the back of that room in folding chairs next to a foot-pedaled trash can, smiling at you, because they would rather absorb that humiliation than ruin your wedding. They are going to make themselves small, because that is what they have been made small for the last 2 years, in small ways, in small comments, in small omissions. You do not have to let them. You do not need a microphone. You do not need a maid of honor who is also an attorney. You do not need 180 witnesses. You need only the very specific, very lonely, very simple decision that the people who raised you are not negotiable. That they do not have to win arguments to deserve a seat. That they do not have to dress well, or fit in, or hold a charger plate the right way, or know what fork to use, or be in any particular tax bracket, to be honored at the table where their daughter or their son is getting married. I sat at table 18 for 9.5 minutes total before I made the decision. I have, in the years since, never spent a single dinner anywhere. Not at a state senator's banquet, not at a banking industry function, not at the very modest gala Edmund has, twice now, very gently asked through my father whether I might consider attending, that has come anywhere near being worth the contempt that was loaded onto those 9.5 minutes for my parents. My name is Beth Donnelly. I am 32 years old. I am a partner in a small dental practice in Westmont, Pennsylvania. I am the mother of Nora Frances Donnelly, aged 2 1/4. I am the daughter of Frank and Mary Donnelly, who have lived at 412 Larkspur for 31 years, and who, every single Sunday, set out an extra chair in case one of us shows up unannounced. I have never, in my life, been more proud of where I come from than I am right now. If this story landed for you, please tap that like button and subscribe, and tell me in the comments below what your version of Table 18 has been. Tell me if there is a Larkspur Street in your life. A kitchen with a flickering bulb and a chipped mug and an extra chair. Tell me if you are still trying to make peace with people who treat your parents like a logistical problem. Tell me what you have decided. Tell me what you are still deciding. I read every comment. I am right here, on the other side of the glass. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you next time.